Good afternoon, everyone. I believe it's afternoon for, well, practically all of us. My name is Stjepan Gabrić. I'm Senior Water Supply and Sanitation Specialist in the World Bank, essentially covering the World Bank water supply and sanitation operations in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Southeast Europe. And today we'll be moderating and chairing two sessions of our workshop, which we slightly provocatively called Beyond Utility Reach, essentially focusing on rural wastewater management. I mean, the whole idea came from the group of people who are working on Danube Water Program in association with ICPDR, discussing the topics that are somehow neglected in the wastewater management. And one of these field or subfield which is neglected is actually rural wastewater management, because most of discussion and almost all of the investment actually go into urban wastewater management. This is where the money is, this is where the big wastewater treatment plants are. So this rural aspect was definitely neglected, and we thought it's worth putting some effort in opening this topic, inviting people, discussing status, and exchanging experience. So this is kind of a second day of our knowledge development workshop. I will be chairing two sessions following yesterday's session that were pretty much focused on a regulatory legal framework and position on behalf of from the point of European Commission. Today we'll be looking at two different aspects. First aspect is basically organization of service provision when we speak about rural wastewater management, experience from different parts of the region and different parts of Europe. And in second session, we will be basically looking more at the technical technology level. What are the, I wouldn't say optimal, but sometimes neglected, but definitely very interesting and promising technologies that we believe should be further advanced through promoted through events like this one. But let me start with my first session. So the title of the session is Good Practice at the Municipal Level. We will be, as I said, looking at different forms of organization of the service provision and rural wastewater management in three somehow similar but still distinctive countries on the region. So we have with us Mr. Marjanović from Belgrade, Serbia, Mr. Ike Zeidler from Linz, Austria, and Mr. Broco from Lisbon, Portugal, who will be presenting experience from their own countries in how the rural wastewater management is organized and provided in individual countries. And be prepared. I basically asked them to be openly to discuss all the advantages and disadvantages, success and failures, and also to be critical if needed. So the whole idea is that we exchange the opinion, that we learn from each other. So basically, based on this experience and knowledge of your local circumstances, you can come to the conclusion which is basically optimal approach for your own case. So with that in mind, my pleasure is to introduce Mr. Prvoslav Marjanović, who is advisor to the director of Jaroslav Černý Institute in Belgrade. Mr. Marjanović, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stjepan. Good afternoon, everybody. I will start sharing my screen so that we can proceed. Okay, you can all see me, you can hear me well, I presume. As I said, I will speak in my personal capacity. I don't work for government, I don't work for EU or the bank, so I can speak my mind up and offer you my insights into the problem of wastewater management in Serbia and Danube River Basin in general, especially focusing on rural communities. I will try to speak quite quickly because we have only 15 minutes to present the material, so let me move on. I will start off by revisiting yesterday's presentations and giving you an introduction. Then I will talk a little bit about the state of decentralization and individual treatment facilities in Danube River Basin from the insight into the data that is available. I'll then focus on Serbia. And then I have two sessions, two parts of my presentations which are geared towards really steering or trying to provide a way forward. Yesterday, we heard that there are 22 million people approximately without flush toilet in Danube River Basin. I think that figure is slightly misleading. It's in the region. When you look at the basin itself, on the first graph, you see the water supply connection rates to public pipe water in the household. On average, it's about 80% in the Danube River Basin. So it's unrealistic that the 20% of 80 million people in the Danube Basin, that's 16 million, not 22, maximum possible without flush toilet. More realistic figure in the Danube River Basin is probably closer to 5 million without a flush toilet. In the region itself, when you count Ukraine and Moldavia, which are only parts of the country are in the Danube River Basin, the situation may be different. But in the Danube River Basin, the more realistic figure is close to 5 million. That brings me to the second graph, which basically shows the disparity between urban and rural connections and really tells us where the gaps are and in different countries with respect to rural population. And you see that in lower Danube countries, rural population is really lagging behind. Anyway, this is a map of agglomerations by size in the Danube River Basin, and you see obviously that the majority of those that we could consider in the rural sector are in the range of 2,000 to 5,000 people, even though some of them may be urbanized slightly in the center of the communities and so on, but a large number of settlements or agglomerations are could be classified as rural in character. When I look at the latest available data on the percentage of generated load in agglomerations bigger than 2,000 inhabitants, population equivalents in the basin, which are not collected as per Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, they don't have sewerage systems. You see a striking difference between lower Danube countries and upper Danube countries. More than 75% of these communities between 2,000 and 5,000 people are typically not connected to sewerage systems. Not to speak about agglomerations and settlements smaller than 2,000 people. If I look at the generated load in agglomerations, which are reported as individual and appropriate systems, and the percentage of the generated load connected to those, again, you see that there are some differences between especially Hungary and Slovakia. And I think it's probably the reason for these differences is in the way the individual systems are reported. I have a suspicion that some of the septic tanks are reported as IISs rather than as proper treatment individual systems. If I look at unconnected or uncollected and IISs, you see the boundary between, or the old Iron Curtain, if you want to use the analogy. And that's really the level of the development. And it's striking how big the problem is. So all these unconnected and EIS classes can be considered as individual systems to a large extent. So the task to implement the directive, remember these are agglomerations bigger than 2,000, is enormous if we are going to connect all these people across the lower Danube. If I now look at agglomerations bigger than 2,000, and the percentage of EISs which are discharging to soil rather than the sewer system or the treatment plant by tracking the emptying of the systems to the appropriate treatment plant, you see again, there is a large proportion of those communities, especially in middle region, in Hungary, Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Moldavia, parts of Romania, which are actually discharging into the soil. Now, soil as a recipient of treated or untreated wastewater is not recognized by the Water Framework Directive or the Urban Wastewater Directive, which I think is a major problem. That again is pushing us in the direction of having to connect all these people to centralize or to discharge into the wastewater, into the water streams rather than avoiding. If we do that, I think the impact on the environment are going to be much bigger on the status of water than they are currently. If I focus on Serbia, this is the distribution of settlements, not agglomerations, in the different size classes. And you see again that less than 2,000 is the majority, which we understand. 2,000 to 5,000 is a significant number. The rest is manageable easily by centralized system, 5 to 10,000, 10 to 50, and so on. In Serbia, we have delineated 398 agglomerations, taking care of some 745 settlements bigger than 2,000. Now, the major problem we have, as Konstantin mentioned yesterday, is depopulation. And if you look at the trend of the population in different class sizes, you see that the communities less than 5,000 people are all on a serious decline rate. The national population seems to be stabilizing or at the beginning of a declining trend in communities bigger than 5,000 people. So those are not, there is no question for those to go centralized systems, but for those from 5,000 down, I would be very reluctant to go and design collective systems which will not serve the people which are disappearing in those communities. When I look at what percentage of population in Serbia lives in different size classes, I see that the biggest chunk of people lives in the communities between 10 and 50,000. But I also see that the percentage of population living in communities smaller than 5,000 is closely 40% of the total population. So we're talking about some 3.5 million people. If I take the Serbia as an example and look at the percentage of people in different settlements, not in agglomerations of different sizes, which are served by individual sewerage systems, and I include in individual systems even septic tanks and pit latrines, we're fully aware that they are not adequate treatment. You see that 95% or more on individual systems covers by a large territory of Serbia and thousands of communities. Now, when I look at the character of those communities, I see that the communities between less than 2,000 are typically rural. There are approximately 600,000 individual systems serving those rural communities. Mixed systems, those are 2,000 to 5,000 people, approximately 205,000 individual systems in place, and 325,000 individual systems in place in urban and peri-urban settlements, those bigger than 5,000 people. Those in red should probably continue we should push them to connect to the centralized wastewater treatment system, unless you give some exceptions for the outskirts of the cities. The blue and the greens, I think, do not merit collection systems, centralized and central wastewater treatment plants in my mind. When I look at the current planning in Serbia, we are planning according to detailed implementation plan for the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive some 2.3 billion for construction of new sewers. That's assuming that everybody will be connected to the central system. 92% of investment in the network is for new sewer systems. If I look for wastewater treatment itself, I see that some 30% goes into medium-sized communities, the bigger proportion of the population. Some 30% goes to communities bigger than 10,000, but those 27% goes into communities between 2,000 and 10,000 people, of which, when you split it between the less than 5,000, you see about 12% of the investment going to the sector for wastewater treatment in the communities less than 5,000 people, assuming they all get connected to the sewer system. Now, for the sake of the argument, I'm going to assume that we're going to stop building any new sewer systems. And all those that are not connected currently will go into individual systems in communities smaller than 5,000. And if I look at the potential for savings, the red ones will definitely stay centralized. The 5 to 10,000 will also largely stay centralized. The others will go to individual systems under that assumptions. Giving us a figure of about 1 million individual systems to be installed and deal with the total population of Serbia, including those in settlements more than 2,000 people, not only in agglomerations. Also, for the sake of the argument, if I assume those figures, then it's possible to save around 2 billion euros on the construction of the new sewers and some 350 million euros for centralized wastewater treatment. These savings would allow us to consider subsidies for some 600,000 households to the level of approximately 4,000 euros per system to supplement the investment of the households in constructing proper individual and appropriate systems at individual households in those areas. Is it feasible? According to the data we have insight to, absolutely. Typical costs in Belgium do not exceed for activating sludge plant or an equivalent 1,000 euros per population equivalent. So for an average household of four people, you're talking about 4,000 euros to install on-site treatment facility and discharge the treated water to soil without discharging to sewers. Similar costs in the United States also are documented and well prescribed. If you look at the United States itself, and I would also urge people to consider the experience of Ireland, you see that the developed West Coast has many states with large proportion on individual systems. If it's feasible for them, I don't see why it's not feasible for the lower Danube Basin. And in closing remarks, I want to state that detailed analysis are obviously needed on all costs and benefits. There are many additional advantages which are possible and realistic by going individual systems in smaller communities and rural communities especially, such as flexibility, mobilization of additional funding from the individual houses because the subsidy program will not fund 100%. You can attract additional funds from the households to invest on their property. You can create a whole new industry for installing those, maintaining those, and so on, create jobs, and so on. You just have to develop proper management models to do that. Main problem is really not the technology, and I'm sure this will be addressed in the next session. The problem is really in the management of those systems, like Konstantin mentioned, that they don't have the capacity to manage these small systems. The problem of management is something to be considered very seriously, and different models for management are possible and can be considered. It's also important to identify all the role players and their responsibilities. Just to show you some other advantages, this is the diagram coming from Rocky Mountain Institute, published in 2004 on the role of decentralization systems, and I suggest everybody looks in that report because it documents details of advantages and disadvantages of decentralization. The investment and the stepwise investment in centralized system, creating a lot of spare capacity and investment in unneeded capacity, especially if your population is declining. Your lead time for designing and implementing larger systems is 5 to 10 years. Your lead time for implementing individual systems is 1 or 2 months if you have everything in place legally and so on. The different management models that have been used in different places are varied, and I just mentioned 5 here from the United States. These different management models have different role players, and each role player, from a regulatory authority, service provider, owner, user, all the way to responsible management agency, if you create such an agency in your country, and the role of each particular role player in different phases of the implementation of individual systems are clearly documented and can be implemented. I think the requisite for this is an enabling legal framework from the EU and national governments, which I believe is currently not the case, even though Ireland has gone a long way for providing this, and people are advised to look at the case study of Ireland, especially in light of the court case that they lost against the EU, and then implementing changes to their Water Services Act, and now it's possible. It's time to start thinking with an open mind and stop ignoring the potential of individual and appropriate systems because of difficult management issues that can be easily resolved. It's time to get soil recognized as a recipient of a treated wastewater primarily, and I think it's very pertinent and applicable to the Danube River Basin, especially the lower Danube for communities and agglomerations smaller than 5,000 equivalents. What the problem really is that our experience with on-site treatment in the past has been bad. Doesn't mean that the future has to be the same. Sewers are not really the sign of modern civilization. Sometimes we have to question those approaches seriously. And my suggestions to end the presentation is the Danube River Basin study to consider and develop appropriate management models and identify all the role players and their responsibility for effective implementation, especially for lower Danube is advisable with the project, maybe through ICPDR to explore this. I would love to be a part of this, even if it is at the cost of postponing my retirement. We need to lobby the EU to create an enabling legal framework and not to discredit individual and appropriate systems, as we heard yesterday might be the intention. And we have to recognize the real role of individual and appropriate systems and the role they can play in us all improving the quality of life in the rural sector and in some urban areas also. Thank you.
Thank you, Pravoslav. Thank you for this presentation. This is exactly what we want to achieve. I mean, we want to, be able to critically assess based on scientific evidence, current practice, look at the possible options, and come to recommendation to the benefits, I believe, of the end user. One explanation: the figure of 22 million refers to the population of all countries that are participating even partially in Danube River Basin. So not only the catchment area, but the whole country. That's the difference in numbers is coming back. But your actually presentation serves as a very good introduction to our next presentation. This is the experience how to organize service provision in a sizable number of the small communities acting with some kind of umbrella organization. So Upper Austria Water and Mr. Eichel Zeder, General Manager of Upper Austria Water. Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stepan, thank you very much for your introduction. I start my presentation. Just a moment, please. So, yes, I talk about a report about rural wastewater treatment provided by a cooperative in Upper Austria. And I made the presentation with the chair lady of the cooperative Dingdorf, Hermine Wessely. Okay. So Upper Austria, a state of the Republic of Austria, is in the northwestern part. And we have a hilly region, and in the south we have mountains with narrow valleys. The structure is that we have 440 communities, but we have more than 4,000 villages with less than 20 dwellings. So we are a scattered and small agglomeration. One of the solutions we support are water cooperatives. Water cooperatives are the user, owner, are the responsible persons, and they had the principles that are a public cooperations referred to the Austrian law. They are also controlled by the authority, by the local authority. They are self-determined and they have a personal responsibility from their organization. One of the principles is also cost covering. The organization is so that all members have to pay to the costs. Water cooperatives are like communities, are financed by connection fees, by basic charge and consumption charge for the operation. And they have also the possibilities to get subsidies from the state and from the Republic. They also have the possibility to get credits and loans. In Upper Austria now we have about 260 cooperatives in the regions, and I think in all regions we have it, but most in the hilly side of the northern part of Upper Austria. The member structure is that the small villages up to 10, up to 30 households are a topic to organize cooperatives in the for wastewater management. In Austria, we have more than 3,400 water cooperatives, but they are also dealing with water supply, irrigation, and flood control and melioration. For me, it's a solution predominant in the rural areas, in the small villages, where they can get an organization with inhabitants from the village. I show you an example, the water cooperative from Dingdorf, from the example from the founding to the planning, designing, constructing, and operating a small sewage and wastewater treatment plant. The foundation was 2006. The village had 23 households and 2 farmers. And in June 2009, they started with the construction of the plants, and 1 year later, it got commissioned by the local authority. In the middle, you'll see the chair lady, which have a lot of men to support. What was the motivation to organize a cooperative, a water cooperative, and to invest? There was an extreme drought, summer 2003, and some of the house wells from the village were dry, so the community has to supply them. And a solution with the nearest water cooperative for water supply was more than 2 kilometers away. So they made test drilling, and in the granite it was not easy, but they found it groundwater. So the water cooperative for water supply was the first step in solution. And then starts a discussion because some inhabitants were not sufficient to deal with sinks and septic tanks in the village. And this was the second step, that also they organize a wastewater treatment plant. I think to have a positive realization, it is very important to find an experienced consulting engineer. Not for urban solutions, you need one for rural solutions. And after the planning, they tendered the construction works. For the whole, the building costs about €1 million. 2/3 are investment to the wastewater part. 1/3 was investment to the water supply. The cooperative was financed by her own with connection fees. I think about 15%, 10-15% has been connection fees. Then they get subsidies from the Republic and from the state, about 20% for water supply and 40% for the wastewater cleaning, and the rest was financed by a credit. So the working cost per year annual is about 20,000 for wastewater and 15,000 for water. 2/3 from these costs are the payback from the credits. The system the data are about 2,000 meters PE installed, and the village is located on a hilly side, so it was easy that they get the viewers and they can provide it by gravitation. The plant is below the village, and so no pumping stations are necessary. The wastewater treatment plant was not a package plant, it was a reed bed filter system, first with a rotting station with straw, and then the wastewater come to the reed bed filters, and after an inspection shaft, the effluent disposal got to a small river, to a ditch. Here you see a photo from the controlling the distribution devices during the construction. And here you see effluent testing, and you see that the measured values are very deep they are not close to the threshold values. Also from the BOD5, you see it's below 10% from the limit value determined from the authority. It's interesting also in winter, if you have snow, if the plant is covered with snow, also the effluents are clearly below the determined values. A cooperative is belonging to their members, and though the community of the village cares to operate the wastewater plant. They have an annual list, and so the straw management for the rotting stations is provided by the members. They have also a field for to dispose the rotting, and now they are 10 years on operation, and there is enough place to dispose the straw. The water cooperative was consulted by the umbrella organization by Upper Austrian Water. This organization was founded 1946, long time ago. It was founded by a resolution of the Upper Austrian Parliament, and also the general manager and the office is financed from the Upper Austrian government. The main objectives are team working, speak with one voice, to pool ideas from the members, and to support interesting villages foundation, the water cooperatives, to help them to buy spare parts or equipment, to organize civil engineers, and also to hold training courses, also to represent their interests in the Austrian government administration. You see, the education program is courses for chairpersons, for cashiers, for water managers, and for attendants. Upper Austrian Water has group insurances for third-party insurance and accident insurance for the volunteers of the different cooperatives. Upper Austrian Water supports not only the wastewater cooperatives, also water cooperatives for supply or for amelioration and irrigation. Important and actual information they can get from a website. The members can get from information from a website. So also on, for example, on weekend or in the evening, they can get right information to work and organize their cooperative. Let me show one other successful solution. This is also in the northern part. There is a rural community with 8 villages, and the 8 villages built together for every village a solution to make wastewater cleaning plants. So the organization of Upper Austrian Water supports the cooperatives to be self-determined, to be cost-effective. So the solutions are local-based and independent. They have to do their own work. And when I see 1946 up to now, we have a long time experience to show that this sustainable model should also be fit for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Maybe quick question before we move further. How unique is this form of association cooperative for Austria? I mean, does it only exist in Upper Austria, this kind of umbrella organization, or similar organization exist in other parts of Austria?
Cooperatives are in every part of Upper Austria, main in Upper Austria, Salzburg for water supply, but also for wastewater in Styria. And umbrella organizations are in Salzburg and also in Styria and the Burgenland. Nowadays there is discussion, and I'm consulting in Carinthia. And we have models in Ireland, in Spain, in Denmark, in Finland. And our Upper Austrian model is covered in Uganda. So in Uganda, they have 6 umbrella organizations for the whole country. And in Uganda, for example, they make water supply and sanitation. It's both. So not only water supply, not only sanitation. The model is that the villages make both together.
Thank you. I think it's actually a very good model that could be, replicated in many other parts of the region, not fully utilized. I would definitely advise for the people to explore it further on their own. We also have a possibility to ask additional questions during the Q&A session after the presentation. Our final presentation for this session is Nuno Broco, who is Executive Vice President of the Aquas de Portugal, which is kind of, separate organization. So we move from kind of locally, almost self-organized municipality to providing services, but even in the low density area, from the somehow centrally run organization, which is Aquas de Portugal or Portugal Water. So Nuno, thank you for finding time to being with us today. So floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by sharing my screen. I think that now
it's coming slowly. Okay, here it is. Okay. You just wish to run it.
Okay. Okay, I think now that you are seeing my screen. Yes. First of all, thank you very much, World Bank, for this invitation to share with you our experience in this field of decentralized wastewater treatment plants. Let me tell you that I'll go very fast in some topics. The main issue is about discussion, so I would like to share a little bit of our history. So I'll go for ADP presentation, how we get here, and our approach that we have developed during the year 2000 for the rural systems, then the tools that we have developed, and the current challenge that we have in this topic. First of all, tell you that Portugal is in the west part of Europe. Of course, you know it, but we have this Mediterranean climate, and we are a very asymmetric country. We have all the majority of our cities in the coastal area and the inland part with the small agglomerations of populations. For us, water is central, and even seawater, even raw water that we share the most part of our river bases with Spain. So for us, for Portugal, the water is one of the central topics. Well, brief presentation about ADP. We are a public company. We are our shareholder is the Portuguese state. We have been founded in 1993, and we have made an investment during this last 27 years, about 7.5 million euros, 7.5 thousand million euros. and we serve around 80% of the national population. The remaining part is served by other operators that we have in Portugal, and we employ around 3,000 employees in this moment. We manage a huge number of assets, water and wastewater, and mainly on the bulk part of the system. So the retail part of the water system is on the responsibility of the municipalities for the most part of the areas where we are. Like I told you before, we are a small country, only 10 million inhabitants, but the biggest part of our population is focused on the coastal area, and the other part, the rural area, are in the countryside. So we have a big challenge in terms of management of our assets. We have big plants in the coastal area and very, very small plants in the inland part of the country. During these 25 years, we have achieved important results in terms of sanitation and also in terms of safe water. And just to tell you that, although we have in this graphic, in the top graphic, that only 80-something% of the population is served by wastewater service, this means central wastewater service. Some private solutions are not included in this graphic. So in this moment, Portugal has a coverage of service around 90-something%. Well, how did we get here? It's important to share with you our story from the last 25 years. 25 years ago, Portugal had a very, very poor service in terms of wastewater and water supply. The responsibility of this service was under the responsibility of the municipalities. We have a very important number of small municipalities, and they are small, and some lack of capacity is in their operations. So 25 years ago, only 15% of our wastewater was treated in proper wastewater systems. Only 50% of the water distributed was safe, and only 75% of the population was connected to water supply systems. So at that moment, this was the big picture for the water sector in Portugal, with a huge infrastructure gap, low performance, low quality of service, very inefficient, with a talent deficit that was one of the major reasons for that, and that was not sustainable. We had at that moment an exception, that was EPAL. It was the operator for the Lisbon area, for a set of municipalities around Lisbon. It was a very, very old company with more than 100 years. And that was the exception, and the Portuguese government took the decision in 1993 to use that example to create a new company that was Águas de Portugal, and it was needed an institutional reform to do that. So at that moment, with Águas de Portugal, it was created a new concept that was multi-municipal systems. This was partnerships between the central government and the municipalities, public partnerships that operates with a concession contract. This contract includes a capital investment plan. We operate under a full cost recovery model, and we have a very, very powerful regulator in this moment in Portugal that regulates all these operations. So this was the framework in 1993. In that moment, we have focused our main attention in the coastal area. So we have dedicated our investment plans to this first generation of multiple municipal systems, and we have created a set of new infrastructures, and we have increased a lot the quality of service in this coastal area. So the results that we have achieved at the end of 1999, it was very, very good results, and the Portuguese government took the decision at that moment to expand this concept to other regions of the country. So now we arrive to the main topic of this workshop. That was, for us, we call it the second generation of multi-municipal systems. But at that moment, some decisions were very important, because the model that we applied to the coastal area of the country was not possible to apply to the inland part of the country, because we had at that moment a very low population density at the inland part, low income from that population. The population was very old. Some desertification process was going on in the inland part of the country. We had a decreasing of the demography, and the topography of the inland part of the country was very different from the coastal area. So a different approach was needed to this second generation of multi-municipal systems. So at the moment, the main question was how to close the rural access gap to wastewater treatment and sanitation service. Like I told you, with a very difficult topography in the inland part of the country, we find out that we need to build around 500 wastewater treatment plants in this part of the country. The largest part of them were below 2,000 inhabitants. This 500 wastewater treatment plants only serves around 6% of national population and represents around 20% of our global investment. So this was a huge challenge at that moment. In this picture, you can see these numbers, and the total, like I told you before, the total number of wastewater that we have below 2,000 inhabitants is around 70% of our total number of wastewater. But we only serve around 6% of the national population with that, and this brings us to the investment per capita that is very, very high when compared with large wastewater treatment plants. So that was the issue at the moment, and we had some goals in terms of the investment plan. We had the goal to make a standardization of this wastewater treatment plants. We had this goal mainly because we want to minimize the project and tendering time. We know at that moment that the CapEx and OpEx optimization were crucial for the success of these operations. And of course, we had the full compliance of legal discharge limits. And one of the concerns was the operation of this huge number of systems. So our approach at that moment, in the beginning of 2000, was to define a global solution, a set of global solutions. We have pre-engineered a set of solutions for these small decentralized wastewater treatment plants. We have introduced that in a decision support system software, and this software gives us back all the price lists, drawings, project specifications, and tender documents. So this was indeed one way to speed up our investment plan at that moment, and in the second, with the second goal of having this kind of new assets with controlled operation and maintenance costs. So this is an example about our tool. It's a very, very simple tool, because the pre-engineering have already been done. We introduce the population, the required treatment, the available land, and the site characteristics. We have a decision tree in this software, and we have this standardization for a range of dimensions of these small wastewater treatment plants, from 250 inhabitants to 2,000 inhabitants, with different requirements of treatment, we reach to the final treatment line. So this is the input of the system. At the output of the system, we have, of course, what we aim in terms of tendering the documents. We have the decision about, or suggestion of decision about the best treatment line, a capex estimation, the project specification, pricing list, and so on. So we move forward to the tendering process with this output. So this is some examples about estimations of capex and some analysis that we can do with this software, and also the drawings that we get from this approach. So telling this, and just to resume, during this with this approach, during this decade from 2000, we have made this pre-engineer of all our solutions. We have built more than 500 wastewater treatment plants, and we comply with the public law. So we tender according to public law in Portugal. That is not always very, very fast. We have made this standardization of solutions, and we have made this optimization of CapEx and OpEx. That was for us also very, very important. Now, and to conclude, we are operating these systems for 15 years, some of them 20 years, and we have some modifications in the context that are bring us to a new stage of our engineering. So rural population keeps decreasing in these areas. Some of them we have built them for 500 inhabitants, and now we have 200. We have now, of course, new technologies available. We have already 20 years for the most part of these plants. We have some aged infrastructures, and we have a set of new challenges inside the ADP group: energy neutrality, circular economy, digitalization, and others. And we have this return of experience from 15 years of operation. So we are now doing a re-engineering of these systems. We are now looking for these systems, and we will take some decisions in the near future about the rehabilitation of these systems. Some of them we will improve the capacity, some of them we will transform them into pumping stations. So now we are in the second moment of the life of this small system. So that is it. And I'll let you with a picture from Portugal and from our nice coastal.
Thank you, Nuno, very much. I have to admit that there was a World Bank study to Portugal 2 or 3 years ago, and we went there, and we knew that Portugal has this Portugal Water state-run organization. And admittedly, coming from Eastern Europe, I was skeptical. I like, okay, state-operated agency, they ain't gonna work. And I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, the thing seems to work. The plants are constructed, operating, cost recovery seems to be there, etc. So, I mean, we have now seen in these 3 presentations 3 different options. You have case of Serbia, where responsibility is, as most in other countries, simply dumped to the local government, said, okay, your problem, you carry it on. You have Austria, where those local governments has organized cooperations on voluntary basis. You have Portugal Waters, who have basically, organized themselves as a state-operated holding for provision of certain services. I hope that my colleagues and friends from Croatian Waters are listening this, maybe an idea where the Croatian Waters could develop as well. But it's interesting, the 3 different approaches for dealing with the same problem. And that's the whole idea of this session, basically to hear experience of different management models, because this session is about management, not technology. Technology is going to be the next one. And so basically people can see what options exist and what is probably more appropriate. I remember during the study tour to Portugal, there was a colleague from Montenegro who said, well, every model you can work if you have the right people to implement it. That's also, there is some true in that. There's a lot of in people, not only in the model. There is no perfect model whatsoever. Before going to a Q&A session, I have a special privilege to invite a colleague of mine who I respect very, very, very much. Mr. Manuel Marinho is lead World Bank water and sanitation specialist, recently retired, who basically for a long time led World Bank engagement in the sector of water supply and sanitation from Montenegro to St. Petersburg in Russia. So if there is a person in the World Bank who has the most experience and who knows the most about how the World Bank engagement and how the sector has developed, what kind of evolution the sector went in the past period, that's certainly Manuel, the person with really great experience and great knowledge. I believe Manuel currently in exile in Portugal, if I'm right?
Yes, exactly. I'm living in Portugal, northern part of Portugal. And my service is being provided by one of the companies of Aguas de Portugal.
Okay, so Manuel, floor is yours. Just want to hear from you, as I said, basically, I don't know anybody who has your level of knowledge and experience from Danube region as well. What have you seen? How the things have developed? What is the optimal option from your point of view?
Let me start by congratulating the organizers of this session and the presenters. One always learns new things, and I definitely learned some few things today listening to you three. Let me give you some quick points of what I took from your presentation, ideas I have from the previous experience. One comment: the title of the session, "How to Close the Gap to Wastewater Treatment Sanitation Services," in a way implicitly talks about standard treatments, and I could see in the three presenters that the vision is much open, much wider. Individual systems, decentralized systems, small-scale systems, new technologies are there, and you are applying it. I would probably start by my conclusion. Both the Vienna Group and the Commission should use their position to lobby strongly the European Union to try to change and adapt their regulations. What Mr. Marjanovic said resounded all discussions we had. Why discharging into the soil is a bad thing if there is no evidence of pollution of the soil? If you do it right, do it. It's much cheaper in construction and definitely much, much cheaper in operation and maintenance. And I understand there is a tremendous pressure from the industry to go for standard systems, sewers, wastewater treatment plants, big or small. The experience from all these years should help influence the European Union and change that paradigm that was there, that if it is not sewer and take it to wastewater treatment plant, is not valid. I think that is something that almost everyone has already internalized, even though there is a lot of misinformation still around that should be, I would say, dismantled by good knowledge and good experience like the ones you just presented. One point that I think is important to keep in mind, what is rural versus what is urban? And it's not only the size of the town. If you have a 500 people town that is very, very dense in its structure, you probably need to go for a traditional system of sewers and taking the wastewater out and put it in the wastewater treatment plant. Not going into the details of what should be the technology of the wastewater treatment plant. In the end, it's a wastewater treatment plant. It could be a good septic tank, and I would call that a wastewater treatment plant, depending on the size. But you see, rural versus urban, what is the solution? It's something that has to be clearer. It's not just the size of the town. Just to give you one idea, I live in Washington. Half of the time I live in Portugal. In Washington, I have a septic tank in my house. And it works beautifully. And I empty it very rarely because we take the precaution of adding the yeast once, twice every midterm. So that gives you an idea that solutions are valid and that they work. and it's extremely cheaper than connecting to the wastewater system from Washington that would cost me almost $3 per cubic meter. In this case, I pay nothing or almost nothing. So that's a very important point to keep in mind always. What is the operation and maintenance? How does it work? One thing that Mr. Marjanovic didn't mention that I think is important to keep in mind too is what happens to the peri-urban areas. Peri-urban areas, there is a tendency to extend the network and put those waste back to the wastewater treatment plants that might be many miles away from where they originated. Decentralized systems are being used in low-income areas, in low-income countries, and they could be a solution for such situations. Instead of just pumping and channeling all those waste to a very distant wastewater treatment plant, a small decentralized system could work. And I would recommend looking into those options as well. And one final point, just to finish, going back to the beginning. You have a strong position. The Commission is extremely strong. I remember the time it was almost disappearing, and we push it back into reality. And there is a long experience already accumulated and discussed technically by the work you have been doing. Try to change the position of the EU, and at the same time, try to change the paradigm on what wastewater treatment should be, what wastewater management should be. I would always like to prefer to use the word management rather than treatment, because the impact that the experiences and practices in the EU is applying is having a horrible impact on what is happening in very developing countries. Everybody wants to be modern and be like the wealthy Europeans and have a pretty nice wastewater network and wastewater treatment plant, when quite often simpler, more pragmatic solutions and cheaper, and especially cheaper to maintain, could be applicable. So don't only think on what is happening inside Europe, but also think of what is the impact of the image that Europe is transferring to developing countries. Just one example, I was recently looking at a system in Kiribati, one of these tiny little islands in the Pacific, GDP $1,600. And they're thinking of just putting a big sewer because external consultants came and that's the only thing they know. And that's what the rich countries and wealthy countries do. Well, you see, there is an impact that goes beyond Europe, and that has to be taken into consideration as well. Well, just to finalize, congratulations again to the organizers and to the presenters, and hello to Mr. Marjanovic after so many years, seeing that you haven't retired. It's time to do it. Okay, goodbye to everybody.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for finding time to join our workshop. It's always a pleasure to get your advice. I'm always impressed. This guy managed to say in the few sentences something that I'm not able to say in the whole hour. But before we go any further, we still have maybe 5 to 10 minutes briefly for Q&A. There are some questions posted here. Mr. Marjanovic, back to you. I mean, obviously, your push is toward decentralized, toward the lesser level of treatment, toward basically discharging into the ground. Wouldn't that have impact on quality of the groundwater? There is one question saying, okay, I mean, if the Serbia discharge in the ground, wouldn't that jeopardize the quality and safety of the drinking water in groundwater aquifer?
Thank you for that question. I responded in writing to that question, but let me reiterate now. Can you hear me? Okay. The groundwater quality in Serbia, we have no evidence of serious or significant impacts from septic tanks in most cases. We do have evidence of some impacts close to the settlements bigger than 20,000 people or so, purely of septic tanks. But for smaller communities, 5,000 people and less, we have no evidence of any impacts on groundwater quality from the results of monitoring. I must admit that monitoring could be better, and we are working on increasing the density of monitoring to confirm that. Just to clarify, I'm not urging for lesser degree of treatment. Individual systems with new technologies can deliver the same level of treatment as the directive requires, equivalent to secondary. And I just want to thank Mr. Manuel Marinho for saying what is in my mind also more eloquently than I managed to do. I absolutely support everything he has said. I think it's crucial that we avoid throwing money, especially in the lower Danube countries, into solutions which stretch our ability to improve the quality of life and redraws money from different sectors. I will share a screen for a minute, just one slide, that I want to show you what currently is happening in Serbia right now. This is central Serbia. The dots are settlements of any size. The red boundary surrounds the proposed new regional treatment plant. The distance between the north and the south is close to 100 kilometers. They are proposing a new regional wastewater treatment plant, and it has gone through Casper and being approved as feasible. I cannot believe that such solutions are still coming out of the consultant sector for such environments. The main reason for this is that the local authorities in Užice could not find a site for individual wastewater treatment plant for the city of Užice, and then people complained about the wastewater treatment plant next to their village, and the solution was, let's make a big regional treatment plant somewhere else. It's a waste of money, it's a waste of resources that are limited, and the benefits of that investment are going to be the same as building many smaller treatment facilities in rural communities and so on. We are taking resources away from much needed areas of investment elsewhere. The other issue to consider is again related to the demographics and so on, and to the politics of the situation. And I'm sorry to say that we often get sewers constructed just before the elections, local or otherwise. You come into a community, you promise to build them a sewer, and they vote for you. We have to come out of such a mental, how to say, framework. We have to really base our decisions on science and knowledge and what is best for the people and most economically efficient. There are too many other problems that we have to tackle.
Thank you.
In Serbia especially. Thank you.
Thank you, Pravoslav. Nuno, question for you. My colleague from World Bank is asking a question. You mentioned other wastewater systems basically serving more than one household. EIS approach that you are using that could be replicated in other countries. What could you tell us about it? I'm afraid your mic is.
Can you hear me now? Stefan, can you hear me? No.
Yeah, you're sounding like Darth Vader in the Star Wars, I have to say.
Can I try to respond maybe instead until he gets his line on? These are the so-called cluster systems where you treat more than one household. Cluster systems are feasible and welcome also, depending on the situation.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Nuno, can you try to speak now? Maybe it will work better.
Maybe now it's better.
No, not really. Something happens between your initial presentation and okay, we ain't gonna push it. If it's not, basically we'll try to provide written answers on question raised. Wolfgang, question for you. You already said the similar approach has been replicated in other parts of Austria. but still is not universally used. What is the reason why, for example, Tyrol, which is also very much, sparsely populated, separated communities, are not joined together in a similar way? Is it pure political, or what is the reason? Because I mean, your cooperative system seems to be quite appropriate for the country with scattered settlements like mountainous part of Austria.
In Austria, for cooperatives, you need the inhabitants which want to cooperate. In the Tyrol, in the wastewater, in the Tyrol for water supply, there are a lot of cooperatives, but in wastewater there are a lot of associations, because you have in the Tyrol you have narrow, long valleys where you have rivers, where you have a lot of tourism, and though the small, the narrow, long valleys are drained from the end of the valley up to the middle, where the river Inn is, where you have a big river, and the plants, the cleaning plants are here situated.
Okay, so it's a primarily topography of terrain which guides a form of organization, because you said in Burgenland, which is pretty much flat, they do have organized cooperative and they're bringing themselves together, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Okay. With that in mind, I will just briefly, for a moment, turn to my colleague Raimund. Any particular question that you would ask yourself before we close this session?
Thank you, Steve. Just as a Tyrolean, I can confirm what Wolfgang Eichslader said. It certainly depends a lot on the topography, and you have a lot of water also, and the settlement structure is a different one because it's very much located at the bottom of the valleys, basically, where you have a lot of water discharging also. So you have quite often, in the end of the bigger valleys, or in the end of the contributing valleys, also the wastewater treatment plants located there. No specific question from my side. I think we already reached the end also of this session. So I think we all deserve a little break before we go into session 4. Exactly. We'll have a 10 minutes or actually 13 minutes break. So one more time, thanks to our presenters for being with us, Nuno, Wolfgang, and Prvoslav. It was really a pleasure to hear these 3 different models. Each of them, seems to work to the higher extent or the lower extent in different countries. But that's the whole idea, to exchange experience and knowledge among the different models. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you on contributing with your work and time. We will be now having like 12 minutes break and reconvene at 3 p.m. Central European time to continue with the last session before the wrap up, that will be looking at technology and the technical solution used for rural wastewater management. So one more time, thank you, and see rest of you in 10 minutes. Have a nice day.